Welcome to A Little Bit Radical, a business podcast from Standing on Giants. I'm Rob, your host. Join me as I meet people and organisations who are doing things differently, challenging the status quo and, yes, might just be a little bit radical. Eliminating the idea of waste. That's the mission of TerraCycle, a global leader in recycling, recycled content, reuse, and overall waste reduction. I'm thrilled to be speaking to the founder and CEO, Tom Szaky, today. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, Tom, if you are a little bit radical, and you're on our podcast, so we know that you are, what in your early life set you up for that?
I was born in the early 80s, in 82 in Budapest in Hungary. And it's really only relevant because back then it was still under the Iron Curtain. Entrepreneurship was very difficult. And in 86, Chernobyl happened, which sort of destabilized the borders briefly. And long story short, my parents, with me in tow, I was 4 years old, left as, effectively political refugees from Eastern Europe. And we sort of hopped around various Western European countries, from Holland to Germany, to seek asylum. And then finally, 3 years later, landed in Canada. And this, to me, was incredibly formative because growing up in a very poor country like Hungary at the time, we would find value in everything. When you would make breakfast and you had the grease from the frying pan, that would then be poured into a bucket and put in the fridge and used as a butter substitute in the afternoon, and so on and so forth. And it was also somewhere where entrepreneurship was very difficult. And then, a few years later, I'm growing up in North America, which is the heartland of capitalism. And in parallel to that, because there's all this wealth, all this stuff that I couldn't imagine, people were be thrown out. I mean, the first TV I ever had was one I found in the garbage in Toronto somewhere. And it was color,
Wow.
which was nuts. And so I really fell in love at an early age with entrepreneurship. And I think because I was coming from Eastern Europe, where you don't have resource, you're constantly creatively trying to solve everything, without resource. And it's those two things together that I think really put me in the mindset that I am today, which is looking for value in things that maybe others don't, and fierce love of entrepreneurship and how do we creatively solve problems, that maybe people haven't looked at in such a perspective.
That's really fascinating. And when you were growing up in Canada, so from my poor maths, from about the age of 7, did you notice any big differences with your peers in your kind of attitudes to waste and using things and entrepreneurship and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say to me the biggest influence at that early age was actually seeing what my friends' parents had achieved. Because in many cases, they had gone from very humble beginnings to phenomenal entrepreneurs in their own right. One of my friend's parents started as a taxi cab driver and ended up founding what became the biggest live entertainment company in the world. And there's a couple of other examples like this. This showed me that entrepreneurial success can occur, in the flesh, right? You meet the folks and suddenly everything becomes demystified and all of it becomes very possible. So for me in that sort of early age, called it late elementary school to high school, it was less maybe around sustainability and much more around the entrepreneurial journey. And then that all happened in a place which is very conducive to entrepreneurship, and one of my favorite things about North America and why I think it is so good, especially the United States, so good culturally with entrepreneurship, is not just the willingness to take risk and so on, but the way the culture views failure. This idea that it's not a big issue and you can get up and try again, because any sort of radical idea is going to have a lot of failure around it, and you have to be okay with that.
I was reading something just today trying to dissect why the entrepreneurial environment is different in the UK versus the US it was talking about, but North America. And someone had made the point that a lot of VCs in North America have a rule that you are specifically banned from mocking any pitch, however ridiculous it might seem when it comes through the door, because the tolerance for failure is often a route to success. But that's very different to the UK, where we're a bit more so stuck up,
Well,
self-effacingly so stuck up, or a bit more cynical, perhaps. Part of our humor and our attitude is in kind of mocking each other's ideas. But I can
I'll
see
give
how
you
that can crush people early on.
it can. It can. And just to build on it, right? Like, and especially having sort of the both European and North American perspective, in Europe, it's much harder to raise that type of risk capital, like true, venture
Mm.
capital, because a big part of it is, if you're going to borrow money from some friends and you lose it, then what are then like the expectation is like, well, are you going to have to work it back and give it back? In Germany, for example, if you bankrupt a company, you are barred from starting another one for a very long time. In the US, you
Mm.
can bankrupt in the morning and start a new company in the afternoon, more or less, right? And I'll tell you one story. This is a little bit later in time, but that really highlights the magic of the way the American culture looks at entrepreneurship, which is when I was just starting the company and first raising capital. I was like 20 at the time. And I sat at a dinner of some kind. It had nothing to do with me. I was just there, actually at a request of a friend to look at an organization and write a review on it. And beside me was this gentleman from Florida, and we were chatting, and I was describing to him what I was working on, which was very embryonic at the time. And he goes, "Well, I'm in." And I go, "Great." And I didn't believe anything he was saying. We were just sort of enjoying a dinner. But the next day, he sends a $500,000 check. And the following day, he's like, "You just tell me whatever paperwork you want me to sign."
Wow.
And then the
Yeah.
magic was happening because I was sort of living in the office at the time, and he would call at odd hours just to get an update. I think he sort of loved the fact that he could call at 2 a.m. and I'd pick up. And he used to say once in a blue moon that, like, "Hey, if all my money goes away and you lose it, you know what I want you to do?" And in my mind, coming from sort of a more European background, I'm like, "What, like, wash dishes till I make it back," right? He's like,
Yeah. Be your
I
slave. Yeah.
want, yeah. He goes, "I want you to call me with whatever your next idea is and know I'm in, for another $1 million on whatever it is you cook up next." And you know
Wow.
how
Yeah.
powerful that is when
Mm.
someone's like, that failure tolerance. It's not that you want to fail, but the tolerance for failure, because then you're like, "Oh my God, let's play, let's do this," And I think that's just a key part of the magic if you're going to support entrepreneurs is not just the initial risk, but what happens when things, turn and meander and it gets rainy outside and so on.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And that guy was creating, in a way, quite a lot of psychological safety for you to run with the idea, right? So it was
Massive.
like, it doesn't matter, and then that's very freeing rather than being very anxious all the time about how you're going to pay people back. I'm sure that's not everyone's experience. I think you would hasten to say, right? But I think it really illustrates the point very well. So, as an adult, then, I mean, you founded TerraCycle when you were very young. Is that right? Were you 20? Did you say?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question I usually ask at this point is, as an adult, have you become more or less radical? But I think for you, what I want to know is kind of what led you to found a business like TerraCycle at the age of 20,
Yeah.
where it was an impact-driven, a circular economy business. Tell us about that.
So at that beginning part, as I mentioned, growing up in Toronto, I really fell in love with entrepreneurship. But let's be clear, nothing to do with sustainability. It was
Sure.
my ticket to fame and fortune,
Yeah. Yeah.
and everything around me reinforced that that's possible, from seeing it in the flesh to the culture of the country, as we've already discussed. When I went down to university in the US, one of the first classes I took at Princeton was an introduction to economics. And the professor comes in, and the first question she asks, in like the first class, very appropriate, was, "What's the purpose of business?" And the answer she was looking for was maximize profit to shareholders.
Right. Yeah.
You know? It
Yeah.
it didn't ring all that fulfilling to me because I was like, "Look, a
Mm.
business interacts with so many stakeholders, like, if it's a Tesco, how many customers does it serve? Employees does it pay? Vendors does it interact with, et cetera, et cetera? How many of those people actually care at all about profit to shareholders? I imagine it's a tiny, tiny percent." And so I had this sort of journey and thinking about it, and where I landed was maybe profit is not the purpose, but it is an incredibly important indicator of health, right? If the
Mm.
organization is profitable, it's going to flourish and grow, very healthy. And if it isn't, it's going to do the opposite and eventually die. So it's critically important, as health is. But that's not the point. That leaves room for the point. And then maybe the point is, how does it help benefit society or the environment. And that suddenly started putting in my head, like I wanted to start thinking about business models that echo that are profitable, but can do good at the very same time. And I landed on garbage as the topic, and it's become a lifelong fascination, since then, because garbage is filled with so many strange anomalies. The first sort of inspiration moment was honestly my friends who had gone to university in Montreal. They were growing pot in their basement and they couldn't make the plants work. And long story short, one day they take organic waste and start feeding it to red worms, and they take the worm poop and feed it to the plants. And voila, they had a fantastic harvest. And I saw this and got very inspired by it, but the part that really sort of tickled me was the first sort of anomaly of garbage that I learned, which is that it's the only material in the world that has negative value. Another way to sort of put a construct around that is that it's the only material that you're willing to pay to get rid of. Like,
Yeah,
in
you will
fact, in
pay for
Japan,
someone to take it away.
right?
Yeah,
So if you
exactly.
have an
Yeah,
object
yeah.
in your hand, whatever the object is, it's not garbage till you're willing to pay someone to remove it.
Mm.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it is very
And
strange. Yeah.
and it gets weirder, right? So this is the only industry that will legally own everything we possess one day, with no exception.
Expand on that a bit.
Yeah, right? So everything becomes garbage one day, right? No exception. 99% of what we buy becomes garbage within the year of purchase. And even things built to last tend, to become garbage within 3 years, 5 years, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And the garbage industry doesn't just transport or do something. Like, it's not the Royal Mail where you give them a package. They don't own the package. Their job is just to move the package. The garbage industry physically takes ownership over all this material. They will own
Right. Yeah.
everything one day. And for how big of a statement that is, isn't it wild that it's also the least innovative industry per dollar of revenue? And that is the case
Mm.
because it is literally in the flesh, smelly, nasty, gross. I mean, it's not metaphorically. It is like, that is what it is, right?
Yeah.
And
There's very few people that sit as you did, looking as a child, dreaming of entrepreneurship, and then it leads them to garbage or rubbish, as we'd say in the UK.
right, right. But these anomalies, it's also very modern, right? It was only invented in the 1950s. I mean, isn't that nuts how young it is as an idea as well? And these things started really tickling, my brain, because when you find anomalies, those become really interesting on how you can construct exciting new business models around them. And in doing it, you're also doing good. I mean, what a great combination that is. And that has been sort of the draw for me from that early stage till today.
Absolutely. There's a funny link to a previous guest on A Little Bit Radical, Matt Semmelhack, who founded Books, who's also a Princeton alum. So I don't know what they've got in the water at Princeton. Maybe it's that one economics professor putting people off doing shareholder primacy capitalism.
Yeah. Who knows? And it's funny because Princeton is not, at least at the time, this was 20 years ago, not very pro entrepreneurship. I got in a lot of trouble for running the business out of my dorm room. In fact, it's one of the reasons that I ended up leaving school early, because I couldn't do it. They were very much frowning upon the concept of running commerce out of the university,
Yes. Yeah. Well, I remember Matt saying that it doesn't quite have the same reputation as Stanford for, for entrepreneurship and innovation.
That's right.
But he did say, the world needs bankers too, which, I'm not sure how many listeners agreed with that statement, but but I'm sure it does.
It does. It does. Maybe, the question is like, how many, right?
Yeah, perhaps. We've already started talking about TerraCycle, so let's move on in earnest to your work and talk about that time founding the business, because from what I've found from researching you before this interview, initially the business was kind of like quite a creative, like kind of salvage business where you were turning garbage into desirable items like furniture and things like that. Is that correct? And what kind of first inspired you, and where did that lead you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. We started as a consumer product company. So basically, our thesis has always been the same. How do we solve waste through business? And the first derivative of that was, let's make products out of garbage and sell those. And because this whole thing was inspired by taking worm poop and growing better plants, TerraCycle actually started as a worm poop company.
Really?
TerraCycle is Earth Cycle. The logo I drew as a worm. That's how it all began. And we not only did taking organic waste, feeding it to worms, taking the worm poop and liquefying it, but also we packaged it even in used soda bottles, which was pretty cool. So on the
Oh,
shelf,
nice.
one would be in an old Coke bottle, an old Pepsi bottle with just a spray top on top. And so we started in that space, in the lawn and garden space. We were able to finagle our way into getting into all the big retailers, which was a big coup for us at the time. You're in America, that would be like your Walmarts and Targets and Home Depot type stores.
Yeah, amazing.
And then we just started expanding into, saying, how can we apply this philosophy of making products out of garbage beyond worm poop in a soda bottle to bird feeders and, first lawn and garden products like wine barrel. We took wine barrels and made them into rain barrels. We took yogurt pots and used them, as planting pots, all sorts of examples. And then from there, it, said, let's expand even further, and did back to school products like taking juice pouches and sewing them into pencil cases and backpacks. And it just went on and on. But that was sort of the original genesis of the idea was, let's just start making products out of garbage as a way to solve for garbage.
Fascinating. And I actually, now that you've mentioned it, I've seen that one of those juice box items.
Right.
Really cool. Like very, very
Yeah.
desirable. It does sound like the kind of business you would found in your early 20s. Like, let's make cool stuff out of, out of these kind of iconic branded packaging,
Yeah.
And now the business is, dare I say, a little bit more grown up, like more scalable, more.
Well,
more
we had
kind of,
this, big foundational shift because as we kept growing, we realized that as a consumer product company, you make the product the hero, rightly so. And that means that when we were making the worm poop, we were taking certain organic waste, but we were refusing other type of organic waste because maybe the worms, didn't like it as much. Or when we were making, say juice pouch backpacks, certain juice pouches would work, but if they were too used, a car had driven over them or whatever, it wouldn't work. So we found ourselves picking the best of the garbage, just as any consumer product company would pick the best of the inputs to make the product. And we realized we're not going to solve our dream of, how do we eliminate the idea of waste doing this? So in fact, imagine, 5 years in, I'd left school. We were doing, not massive money, but like 5 million in revenue. So not minor either.
Yeah,
And we decided
nothing to sniff at. Very
no,
good.
no, I mean, decent, right? And we decided to foundationally change the business to shift from making the product the hero to making the garbage the hero. And this was traumatic. We ended up replacing half our staff. The board, had a big problem with it. I almost got fired in this whole sort of metamorphosis, but it was very much that. And that is what sort of brought out what is the company today, where the starting point is not, I want to make a chair or a bag and what garbage can I make it from? But there's cigarette butts and how do we collect them and turn them into something? Or, there is wetsuit waste or bicycle helmets or, baby food pouch. I mean, you name it, right? Everything becomes garbage, and make the garbage the hero. And that became phenomenally unlocking to the type of models that we do today. I mean, we still make things out of garbage, but the starting point is the garbage, not the end product.
So how would someone today interact with TerraCycle? Give us an overview of how we might come across you in our daily lives.
So you would first go to our website, say TerraCycle.com, or if you're in the UK, .co.uk. We're in 20 countries where you could access our services. And the first thing you would start with is recycling. Now, before I explain how you would do it with us, the very important note here is what makes something actually recyclable. And this is very misunderstood. Usually someone says a cardboard box can be recycled, which is why it's recyclable, and a toothbrush cannot be recycled, which is why it's not recyclable. And the reality is very different. All recycling in the world, whether it's procured by your council or yourself as a business, is run in the end by for-profit companies. And there's no law anywhere that says that those recycling companies must recycle anything they collect. And as a result, they're only going to recycle what they can make money on. And so really, what makes an aluminum can or a cardboard box recyclable is that it's profitable to recycle. And what makes 95% of objects not recyclable is that it's not profitable to recycle.
Right.
So it's that economic issue. So we at TerraCycle focus only on the things that your local curbside or council systems do not accept. Like you wouldn't recycle glass with us or cardboard or aluminum. but you would anything else. And so you can go to our site. You'll see first a lot of free programs. These are programs that are funded by brands or retailers, which is free to citizens. And you just sign up to collect and recycle anything from blister packs for pharmaceutical packaging to contact lenses to oral care waste, you name it. We pick up the waste from wherever you collect it, say at your school or your business, and then recycle all that material. And that's funded by industry stakeholders. And alternatively, if we don't have a free program, you can buy our service from us as well through our zero waste boxes and other systems. And that's the way that TerraCycle works all around the world, effectively creating recycling solutions to those waste streams that don't have them. And then beyond that, we also do a lot on which you would not interact with as directly, but we work a lot with companies to have them integrate waste into their production. So for example, with Pilot pens, we make the world's first pen from used pens, or ASIC shoe from shoes, and many other examples. Those you would interact with by maybe seeing them out in a store, but not necessarily directly through TerraCycle. And then finally, we do a lot in reuse, where, for example, in France, you can walk into almost any major supermarket and see anything from your favorite scotch to Nutella to shampoo, you name it, in reusable packaging. And you just pay a deposit when you buy the package. And then when you're done, you drop it off in one of our bins. We give you your deposits back. And then we collect it, sort it, get it cleaned. The manufacturers refill it, and back it goes on a shelf, sold to the next consumer. Sort of like the milkman meeting, a modern day in the supermarket across all products.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, I was going to ask you about those programs, actually, because it occurred to me that in the UK, probably listeners may well have come across the Loop program in Tesco, which you trialed.
That's right.
And actually, one of the brands that participated in that, I used to work for, Sipsmith. So
Oh, nice.
you could go and you could refill your gin.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask you about that concept you've outlined very clearly, but the circular economy. I saw you talking, and you said something which I wanted to ask you more about. So you said that the circular economy is all about money flow.
Yes.
Tell us more about that.
This is the key, right? We view circularity, like this idea that we should recycle or reuse, as a public service, like a do-good thing, And as a result, we are sometimes misguided on how it works. In the end, circularity is, as you mentioned, only about money flow. And here's a very simple way to think about it. Imagine if I put an object in front of you and I wanted you to happily give that object another life. I think there's only two ways I can make that happen, right? One would be that the object itself has enough value that you're happy to take it. Imagine if I put a luxury watch in front of you and said, would you happily wear it and give it a new life? If it was valuable enough, I'm sure you'd say absolutely and be thrilled, right? So either the object has to have enough intrinsic value. It would be similar to if you're walking on the street and you see, a bar of gold or, a €100 note or whatever it may be, then you'll happily pick it up and give it a new life.
Very happily, yeah.
Right? Right? So, and now imagine if I put an object in front of you that was more like a dirty nappy or a broken $1 watch, right? There, the only way I believe I could get you to pick it up and happily give it a new life is if I paid you. And at some number, your happiness gets there, right? So that's the key part. Either for an object to be circular, either it has to have enough intrinsic value so that it naturally goes through the system and everyone's happy. Or if the object doesn't have value, then you have to pay the system to do it. And the big white elephant in the room is that the biggest megatrend in object design across all objects is cost reduction. Everything is cheaper tomorrow than it was today. Our clothing, our packaging, everything. So if we are constantly removing value from objects as the biggest megatrend of object design, which is sort of an unfortunate one, but it is the case, then we need to fuel the circular economy with economics, and that is the everything, right? Whether it's recycling, honestly, or reuse.
Yeah, and what you've just said about everything is cheaper tomorrow than it is today, and I can see it with, the explosion of brands like Shane, in fashion, for example, and a constant kind of feels like a sort of race to the bottom of the cheapest possible but desirable products and causing a huge problem. So I wanted to change tack slightly, not massively, but given today's political environment, do you feel like the movement that you're a part of towards circularity, towards waste reduction, reuse, is taking a hit? Is it a particularly challenging time given that political environment? Because it seems to me that these kind of arguments that people like you would make, that I would make, our fellow B Corps would make, are quite unpopular with certain
Yeah.
wings of certain political parties or political thinking. How do you think about that whole issue? And does it kind of dampen your spirits for the future?
Yeah, so the direct answer is yes. There's a lot of headwind right now, and there's two forms of headwind. One is the political, but the other is economic headwind.
Mm.
So first on the economic, right? Sustainability is almost like a luxury investment for countries, organizations. That's why you see sustainability is really the domain of developed and wealthy countries and
Mm.
isn't as much for people living in poverty. It is something we invest in after we have taken care of all the other needs, like basic
Mm.
infrastructure and safety and education and healthcare and all that stuff. So even where TerraCycle operates, yes, we're in 20 countries, but they're all the big developed countries.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the the
Yeah.
proverbial global north, if you will, right?
Mm. And those in poverty wouldn't necessarily be consciously investing in sustainability, but they might have the behaviors that are nonetheless more sustainable because they're doing the things that you were talking about right at the start, less waste by design, by need, right?
Yes, well, it's interesting, right? So you're precisely correct. It could be forced, right? You just live more
Mm.
humble lives, reuse more, and so on out of necessity. But here's the crazy part. If you're living in a village, and it's incredibly poor, almost like pre-economic systems, then there is no garbage, right?
Mm.
The packaging for your food is the peel of the banana or the apple or whatever, right? But the moment that a little economics come in and you're now in an economic system, what happens is you're flooded with the
Mm.
cheapest single-use packaging that exists. So, for example, in India,
Right.
where people can access shampoo. It's not like pre-shampoo, but people can't afford buying a bottle of shampoo. Most shampoo is sold in single-serve
Uh,
sachets.
yeah, the sachets. I remember hearing about this. These millions and millions of sachets that
It's not
that
right. And
yeah.
so imagine if you can only afford, a squeeze of shampoo at a time, right? Now you are a consumer, but the waste footprint is monstrously big, right? And
Mm.
that's the challenge as we move the world into a consumer system. You get this massive wake of waste behind you. And overall, there's economic constraint as we're living through right now, right? Then organizations will pull back on investing in sustainability, especially voluntary sustainability. The other side is what you said in your question on political, is that right now the rhetoric in many countries is sort of anti-sustainability. And that's
Mm.
challenging because it creates two negatives. One is regulations, both, carrots and sticks, like carrots being subsidies and things that help companies, like, look in the US, like subsidies on electric vehicles or
Mm.
renewable energy.
Mhm.
Those go away, which is very difficult. And then also the laws that may mandate such transitions go away. And then on top of that, you have the rhetoric of people maybe not caring as much at the moment, because of what's just being discussed in general. All those
Yeah.
things are absolute headwind. There's no question. What gives me optimism, though, is that the sort of an ironic optimism is the underlying reason we even care about these things, which is the state of our planet, is only getting worse every day across every vector that exists, whether you care about species diversity or waste or climate change, whatever, which means that what we're living through now is by definition temporary. It will
Mm.
reset because it has to, because the underlying stimulus is not solved.
Yes. So at some point, we will just have to do it.
Yeah, we just press fast forward on a bit more destruction faster, but we're going to see the
Yeah.
consequence. It's sort of like an addict who's like, yeah, I sort of feel like I should go to rehab, but I'm going to go party a bit more. And then it's going to be like, when you wake up again, it's like, oh my God, I really got to go.
Now I'm being sent to rehab. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah,
Exactly.
in a
I've lost
wheelchair
control.
probably. Yeah.
Tom, when someone asks you to sum up the incredible impact that TerraCycle has, or even a program that's not a TerraCycle program, but a circular economy program or recycling program, reuse, Is there a particular story or anecdote that you tell them to really bring that to life and of how wonderful, the world could be if we had mass adoption of this?
Yes, it's a good question. I think, what I have seen in my own eyes is if we do take advantage of composting at home and really using our council recycling programs, and then you layer on something like TerraCycle, there is no garbage being produced after the end of that. Like at home, I do all those things and I don't have a garbage pickup I need. And then if you go further to reuse, whether it's through us or anyone, you foundationally eliminate the entire idea of waste. And this, I think, is the profound point, is that we live in a world where we sort of feel like waste has been around forever. But it
Mm.
truly was only invented 75 years ago. Like, let's say 100 years ago. Not only did we darn our socks and cobble our shoes and all this stuff, but all our outputs, things that like were quote unquote waste, were things nature happily digested. If the chair we're sitting
Yeah.
on broke, it would have been made from wood. We would have thrown it, given it to the forest, would have been fine. Or our sweater was too tattered, would have been made from wool. Again, you could literally litter it and the forest would have been fine. In the 50s, we invented complex materials like polymers and plastics and whatnot. But then we also really popularized consumerism. We buy today
Mm.
10 times more stuff than someone alive 100 years ago across every category. And because it is so modern, it is also, I believe, very solvable, right? We just have to, go to these underlying questions and maybe learn a little bit of our past. But if we adopt those points, the concept goes away. It's not something
Mm.
that's been with us, for that big length of time.
I like that idea that it is only a dot in the vast story of humanity.
Yeah.
It barely even registers this length of time that this has been an issue.
Isn't
Yeah.
that wild?
Uh,
Like society didn't have this concept until
yeah.
this century, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is a very easy trap to fall into, to feel that, this has been a slow build up over, the whole history of humanity. It was like, the reality is it's been a very fast build up over a tiny, well, it's a series of a couple of generations.
Yeah, that's right. It's just we forget. I think, society forgets in like 2 generation jumps.
Yes, yeah, it's very easy. It's very easy to forget, isn't it? Sadly, we have to move on to the last section of our conversation today, which is Little Bit Radical World. Now, your work is so intertwined with positive change for the world, but I'm wondering if there is a little bit of a radical change for the world that you would like our listeners to get behind. What would that be and why?
So there's one simple one I would look at, which is if we care about, the state of our environment and truly whatever topic or topics is of interest, maybe someone cares about the fact that half of our species diversity has disappeared in the past 50 years, or is highly concerned about climate change, or, you pick the topic or topics. These tend to be things that we feel very overwhelmed by. We feel that they're very complicated and that we certainly don't have any ability to impact them really easily. And this is what I would love people to open their eyes up onto, which is, I believe, the most fiercely democratic action we take, the action that changes the world the most, real time, is not our political vote. It's how we shop. Because what we buy, more appears tomorrow, and what we don't buy, less appears tomorrow. And that's like literally how it works. Companies constantly think about what do we want and put that in front of us and delete the things that we don't choose to vote for through our money. And I mention this because I think we do most of our shopping without that lens, open, without realizing that. And so the change I would ask for is next time you shop, think about it this way. Whatever you buy, two is going to appear the next day. One certainly to replace the one you bought, and one to signify the trend. And
Mm.
anything you didn't buy, one less will appear tomorrow because there's nothing to replace, but it's signifying a negative trend. And would you shop differently with that frame of mind?
I remember being acutely aware of this the first time that I went vegetarian, then vegan, and now back to vegetarian. Listeners are familiar with my, my various stages of plant-based. But I remember, first of all, going vegetarian and then just the scale of meat in the supermarket hitting me and
Yeah.
realizing that I'd never really looked before.
Yeah.
And it's not just the meat aisle. It's like, okay, there's this, cup of noodles that has chicken in, dried up. And so, yeah, I think conscious shopping is a
And
fantastic one.
what I would say too is, because sometimes conscious shopping, I'm sure you felt this too in your journey, can feel like, oh my God, I have to be an expert on everything. And instead of
Right.
just throw
Yeah.
something on my cart, I got to read the back of the label.
Yeah.
Just simply think of it as, do I want to vote for that product in general? And like, what's my knee jerk on that? Is it something that I'd love to see more of on the shelf?
Yes, absolutely. Do you have a favorite pet product that you have maybe switched to, or that they are absolutely one of your best friend brands that you go to again and again?
That's a good question. Not one that sort of like jumps to my mind, but I have to say I have the same journey as you. 15 years ago, I moved from, eating everything to, I never went all the way to vegan. I've been vegetarian the whole time. I just love cheese too much.
Yeah. Oh, I feel
that
you,
was-
man. I've gone back. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for me though, it's what really tickles me is just the amazing advancements that are out there in plant-based protein. I know it's an interesting sort of industry to watch, the Impossible Foods, Beyond Meats, because they went on such a roller coaster. But it is phenomenal on how great the products are and all the amazing innovation that's happening, in the space. So I love, those sort of products. And to me, the thing is I like consuming. What I get the most excited about is when organizations, and products really embrace this sort of shift and try to bring in circularity, and ideally as radically as possible. That's where reuse gets really fun, when you get to play with companies and they create the coolest ice cream package ever, because now that ice cream package is an asset and it can go around and around, or all sorts of other incredible innovations. To me, that is really exciting, when you can smile and feel better about the new thing that just came out versus, oh gosh, it's just another thing that's going to end up in the trash.
Absolutely. So the last question is always the same, Tom. And it is, if there's someone listening today who has a little bit of a radical idea themselves, maybe for a business or an idea for their personal life, whatever it is, but they don't know where to get started, what advice would you give them?
Not to think too much, and just to put the first brick down, like take the first step in building it, and don't overthink it. I think many times brilliant ideas get lost in overanalyzing them. And the reality is, you just have to start and put the first brick down. Then the world will tell you what was good and bad about it, and then you can keep adjusting and building. But it's a shame if you never even gave it that first step, and it just always fluttered away as a concept.
Absolutely. Brilliant ideas don't age like a fine wine. They die on the vine. That's a quote from one of our previous guests.
Oh, I love
comes
that
back
quote.
to me again and again and again.
Yes. That's so smart. So the way to have it not die is you got to plant it and nurture it. And don't get too hung up on it being perfect out of the gate. It won't be. I mean, I started as a worm poop business, and today we're a global reuse and recycling company and have hardly any similarity with worm poop.
I didn't know that about TerraCycle, and I think that is a genuinely incredible example of exactly what you're talking about, because you started somewhere and that was a viable business, but then you ended up somewhere completely different. But if you hadn't done the worm poop, you wouldn't be here today doing what you're doing now.
That's right.
So,
we wouldn't be chatting right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tom, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. It's really great to talk to you, and hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please follow us on your podcast platform. If you'd like to appear on A Little Bit Radical, or have an idea of someone we should speak to, please email podcast@standingongiants.com, or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. You can search Rob Fawkes or search Standing on Giants and you'll find me there. Thank you very much, and speak to you next time.